It's the fear of God that causes us to be fully and completely devoted to God. Another way to say it is like this: the fear of what God might do to me causes me to be fully and completely devoted to Him. Nowhere is this spiritual truth more clearly taught than in Acts chapter 5. In Acts chapter 5, you find a very familiar story. It's the story about Ananias and Sapphira. How many of you remember that story, all right? In Acts chapter 5. They wanted everybody to think that they were completely and fully devoted to God. But the reality was they weren't, right? Amen. They weren't. And they sold a piece of property, and then they lied about bringing the proceeds of the sale of that piece of property, and consequently, God struck them dead right there on the spot. Ananias first, and then Sapphira later when she came in. Both of them died right there on the spot. What was the result of their deaths? What was the result of that spiritual discipline from the hand of God? Acts chapter 5, verse 5. And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and gave up the ghost. That's another way to say he died right there on the spot. And great, what's the next word? Fear. Great fear came on all them that heard these things. All the believers that heard what happened to Ananias and Sapphira caused them to fear God. They didn't worry about spiritual death or eternal separation from God in that horrible place called hell. What they worried about was God's spiritual discipline. The fear of God came upon them. Practically speaking, the fear of God is living with the constant awareness that He is going to hold us accountable for our motives, our thoughts, our words, and our actions. That's the fear of God. The fear of God is where we're living with that constant awareness. We get up in the morning and we're aware that God is going to hold us accountable for our motives for the day and our thoughts for the day and our words and our actions. It's living in that constant awareness that God is listening and God is watching. And so the fear of God keeps us completely devoted to Him. Wise Solomon says in Proverbs 3 and verse 7, fear the Lord, and notice, and depart from evil. One last verse that I want you to look at, and I'm gonna end. My wife's gonna be so proud. Psalm 86. Psalm 86 and verse 11. Psalm 86 and verse 11. The psalmist says, teach me thy way, O Lord. I will walk in thy truth. Unite my heart to what? Fear thy name. Keep the verse up on the screen just for a moment. I want you to see three things there, and then after I say these three things, you'll see them up on the screen. Teach me thy way, O Lord. Is that not a prayer? It's a prayer, right? That should be all of our prayer here today. God, please teach me the way that you want me to live. Teach me thy will. Teach me how to make an eternal difference in the lives of others. That's our prayer. And then you see, I will walk in thy truth. That's a promise. We make a prayer. God, if you'll reveal to me how you want me to live my life, and by the way, He has in His Word, if He reveals that to us, then our promise is what? I will walk in thy truth. And then notice thirdly, unite my heart to fear thy name. That's our posture or our position. And that is, we place ourselves under the authority of God. We fear God. Therefore, we want to obey God and we want to walk in His ways. And so you see those 3 points there in the next slide: our prayer, our promise, and our posture. Of all people in America today, we as Christians ought to fear God. Amen. That's right. Maybe our culture out there, they don't have the fear of God anymore, but we ought to. Amen. We ought to. And the fear of God ought to cause us to be completely devoted to Him. And we want to be devoted to Him so that we can live a godly life. Godliness. This is going to be a series of messages that's going to stretch you a little bit. It's not going to allow you to be comfortable with where you are spiritually in your life right now. I'm going to be prodding you. I'm going to be putting my thumbs in your back, trying to get you to move forward in your walk with the Lord. We do not want to become spiritually stagnant, but we want to constantly be striving to become more like Jesus. Amen. Godliness. That's the essence of the Christian life. You want to be godly. But no one has ever been godly without being completely devoted to God. And if you're going to be devoted to God, you must not lose the fear of God.